Om Shanti, continued from part 17, title Inspection Tours. In a short time, the word got around that Mandalay had opened a boarding school for children. Rumors about it flew about the educational community of India. Some said that the teachers of Mandalay had turned the children into saints. Other reports said that it had made them into zombies. The educators wanted to see for themselves, and to be sure that they would see the school as it really was, they made their visits unannounced. Local headmasters, administrators of several education institutions, and several famous educators dropped in for these surprise tours of inspection, and they went over the facilities with a fine-tooth comb, looking for something to criticize. The quality of the children's food, the method of teaching, the correlation of worldly and spiritual education, the morale, the test results, all were carefully evaluated, and the observers came away astounded. The teachers of Mandalay always thanked these observers for coming and encouraged them to come again in their unannounced fashion to measure the children's progress. They had nothing to hide, and they were happy to be able to give these people food for favorable publicity. The educators who came were awed by the school's success, but at the same time, they were worried that it could not last. They suggested that the school should register with the government in order to become eligible for economic help, because how long could Mandalay treasury bear the burden of such an economic drain? But the visitors were told not to worry, that this was God's own institution, and God is the giver of everything. So, the school would never be lacking. The people could not understand, but neither could they argue with success. Often when these people showed up, the children would be deep in meditation, and some were even in the midst of a trance experience. The visitors watched in disbelief. They found themselves affected by the powerful atmosphere also, and became quiet and peaceful. When the children came down, they told about what they had seen, describing the wonders of the golden age, and the visitors were touched by what could not but be the truth, coming from the mouths of little children. The extraordinary maturity of these children amazed all who met them. How could such youngsters be so independent, have so much self-discipline, get along with each other so harmoniously, be so devoted to study? And how could they sit so long in meditation? Was it possible for there to be so many saints in one place? Could there be something about the locale or the method of instruction? But the teachers were not even professionals. And why was the atmosphere so peaceful? Why was everyone so friendly? How is it possible that there were no conflicts? The educators dug deeper, searching either for a hidden scandal or a secret key to this incredible success. When they finally asked straight away about the children's remarkable maturity, one teacher gave the answer in this way. Of course, the children who came here were all different. Some began as troublemakers, some were too hyperactive, some too aloof and closed off. Many had bad habits and caused us troubles. So, we went to Baba to ask his advice. These children harass us, Baba. We told him. What should we do about them? Baba was very firm in his answer. Don't ever beat them, he said. To beat them is to do violence. This is a great sin, Instead, make them understand about the harm or loss which each of their mistakes entails. Show them the bad trait which they have and teach them what advantage they will gain if they get rid of it. This must be explained to them gently and well. If any of their demands are proper, you must be careful to fulfill it. You will win their hearts by love and by understanding, and then they will do as you suggest. You must also explain to them that by doing a certain kind of thing, they are performing a sinful act. The fruit of every sin is received on the earth, or else at the bar of final judgment. But it cannot be escaped. The laws of karma are precise and unremitting. When they firmly grasp this truth, then they will be anxious to improve themselves, but do not beat them or mistreat them. Love them. Baba used to say further, these children have left their homes to come here, so they have made a kind of sacrifice already. This should be respected. Their intellect and their organs of action are not yet completely developed. Yet, in some matters, they are superior to adults. If you see them as souls and talk to them like that, they will feel a rapport and they will understand immediately. Still, if they do persist in some unworthy activity, then cut down on giving them some of the things they like to have, and they will improve. For example, do not allow a troublesome child to talk to an individual whom he likes best. Tell him, so long as he does not improve, he cannot speak with this person. And indeed, this technique yielded quick results. The errant child would return to normal very soon. Next title, The Yogis Take an Exam. The work of the godly institution went on. Men, women and children by the hundreds were tasting the nectar of knowledge and finding it an intoxicating brew. Through the power of yoga, they discovered the strength to transform their personal lives. That, of course, was the heart of the problem. A problem which was soon to grow to vast proportions. For those who attained such constant happiness and elevated character proved a threat to the limited egos of those around them, who could not shake off their vices. The province where God has chosen to descend was a wealthy one. It contained more than its share of prosperous businessmen. Many of those businessmen travelled far and wide to conclude contracts in the international market. They were away from home for much of the year. This left their wives free to pursue whatever activities were of interest to them. If a wife showed religious inclination, of course, a travelling husband was happy to encourage that, feeling that such an attitude implied the wife would be faithful, would maintain the household carefully, and would spend her free time doing worship in the temples, thus avoiding temptations. It never occurred to the husbands that their wives might do even more, that they might actually put true religion into practice, changing their diets, their habits, the company they kept, and most significantly of all, maintaining purity of mind and action. Eventually, the day arrived when the husbands returned. A ship full of these travelling merchants and industrialists disembarked one afternoon. These were men weary of the battles of commercial dealing. Some came home victorious, having landed lucrative contracts or sold full inventories of their goods. Others had been less successful, but one thing they all shared, they were yearning for the women they had left behind. Their minds were filled with the prospect of rest and comfort. Their thirst for carnal dalliance was not to be quenched, however, for During their absence, their wives had met and fallen in love with God, and were now faithful to that one supreme husband, the husband even of these husbands. The women's dedication to purify was firm. They refused to give in to any form of persuasion or harassment. The result was predictable. Their husbands' anger rose to violent proportions. They shouted, they slapped their wives, they beat them with straps, they prevented them from going out, they set them off from all contact with Baba or Mandalay, vainly trying to erase the influence which the spiritual father had had on them. But these wives were not the submissive playthings they had left behind. They had become strong. How can a powerful soul tolerate a weak soul's attempt to subdue her? Could a man whose only advantage was physical strength succeed in making a Shakti, a woman filled with God's might, surrender to the sword of lust? Impossible. So, the struggle of brute force against the power of the spirit built up to a climax. Each woman had her own battle to win. Some had an easier time of it than others. Some had to endure torture, but they relied on God's help. And through it all, they kept on singing. I am Shakti. I am peace. I'm always a step beyond. Illusion and attachment I destroy. I play the flute of knowledge, so all can hear and know and live in joy. Such sweet and blissful music makes unhappiness depart. So, the world will become a garden. We souls will all be free, free of bodies or of body consciousness. Even in the midst of their husbands' vituperations, these women would remain cool and humble, stabilized in God's remembrance. They would reply sweetly, O soul, you are my brother, and I wish only for your benefit. I want to turn this abode into God's temple, not make of it a brothel. How can you wish otherwise? If you and I maintain a divine and godly nature, then this house will be like heaven. My love for my husband has not diminished. It is only that now I understand who you are. You are a soul. And so, I love the soul, not the body. You must also. It would disrespect for you to do otherwise. You are the eternal Son of the Supreme Father, and I am His daughter. So let us walk together on the path of true religion, the path of purity, and keep our minds focused only on one. I shall continue to perform all my worldly duties with even greater effort than before. Carry out my household task with efficiency and devotion. Work that I never did before, I will do to such an extent that if you want to spit, I will not hesitate to hold my hands to be your spitting bowl. But you must not prevent me from going to Mandalay. We children of God are cleansing our souls, burning the passions and vicious tendency from our minds forever. Do not place an obstacle in our way, for we are under orders from God. Do not put before us any idea of lust. Our Father is pure and bodiless. And so, we are becoming the same. Please recognize the time. The Iron Age is about to end. A golden age is being created anew. And you also may take your birthright to be a part of it. Cooperate with us. Be a yogi. Let us make our lives pure and beautiful as a lotus flower. Please, I thirst for purity. I beg only this of you, pure life. Birth after birth we have been involved in the pleasures of the senses. But now, for this one last remaining life, For the short years which remain before destruction, let us be pure, let us be holy. The women's words were lovely, well considered and strong, but it was like pouring ghee into the sand. The husbands' ears were closed. They became like raving animals, like addicts who needed their fix. They could not live without satisfying their craving for lustful relationships. When they saw that they would never again have their way with these women, some of them became totally enraged. A curtain fell up their intellect and they attacked. Mercilessly, they beat their wives until they bled. It happened that several women were assaulted on the same evening, and the next day they escaped to Mandalay. It was unnecessary for them to tell what happened because it was plain from their appearance. Their faces and bodies were bruised and blackened. There was blood on their clothes, and some cuts were still open, and blood was oozing out. Their clothes were torn. Their husbands had taken away their jewels and dresses, and the money which was their personal wealth. The women had been driven from their homes. The younger girls at Mandalay who saw the way these wives had been mistreated decided then and there never to marry, but to spend their lives in purity. They now understand the wisdom of Baba's great counsel. O children, lust is your greatest enemy. Lust, anger and attachment are the doors to hell. Now, after seeing how women were beaten like animals, they lost all desire for indulgence in vices and would not have accepted marriage even if Baba gave permission. Meanwhile, the violent husbands banded together and the flames of their hatred of God fed on one another. They were joined also by the fathers and grandfathers and brothers of numerous girls who had adopted celibacy. Those relatives were determined that the girls should marry and allow intercourse. The men formed a group called the AntiO Mandalay Committee, determined to force Baba to stop recommending purity at his satsang. Representatives of the committee went to see Baba. They presented 3 husbands who demanded the right to have intercourse with their wives. The men were meat-eaters and wine-drinkers, recently returned from business trips abroad. They had badly beaten their wives after being denied last favors. One of them had even filed a lawsuit demanding his conjugal rights. The matter had stirred up such furor in Sindh that many community leaders got involved, siding with the husbands. Some of these leaders were also present at the meeting. They said, "Baba, you must tell these women that they should favor the lust desires of their husbands." Baba said, "I am only giving away the nectar of spiritual knowledge. How can I tell anyone to indulge in lust? If they do not wish to come to the satsang, then it is their own choice. But lust is condemned in the Gita, the supreme scripture, as the door to hell. Should I give false advice? My own daughter observes celibacy. Who gave her the order to do that? Who gave me the order for that matter? We're all obedient to the same one, God, the Supreme Father." Baba went on to explain his position. "These are not my commands. I am only a servant, an instrument of God's service. So, how could I order anyone to do anything? No one is under my control. The one who gives orders to them gives orders to me." The people left, but the opposition had not ended. In fact, they stepped up their campaign against Mandalay. Ignorant people were stirred up. If women started observing celibacy, they worried. How will the world go on? They of course had no idea that there is a pure world, a period of time lasting 2,500 years, when human beings are so filled with divine power that they can do and reproduce non-sexually. This is the period called Satyug and Treta Yug, the golden and silver ages, and the people who live at that period are rightly referred to as gods and goddesses. Not even the slightest impure thought arises during those ages. Such a time has long passed, of course, and no trace remains except in mythology. Yet now, Shiv Baba has descended to create once again the new world. The AntiO Mandalay party was powerful. Its members were rich and had strong ties with government and community leaders, which they now used for their own ends. They hired intimidators to go door to door telling families that they would be ousted from their caste if they allowed their daughters or wives or mothers to go to his satsang. These devils frightened the people, and when that didn't work, they abused them. And they even beat up a number of persons who raised objections to such tactics. The mayor and civic leaders were pressured to bar Mandalay from the city. The anti-party had friends on the boards of the local newspapers, including the major one, the Sindh Observer. Soon, vehement editorials were being published against Baba and his satsang. Those men who had supported Baba in the past became frightened of this burgeoning movement and quietly withdrew their support. Those businessmen who had been coming to satsang themselves on a regular basis and who had written letters of permission for their daughters and daughters-in-law also to take part, men who had publicly praised Baba's work, feared loss of business and social ostracism, and so they kept away. Not only that, but many even joined the opposition, becoming officers of AntiO Mandalay. Even the Mukhi, a well-known local personage who was a relative of Dada and long an open admirer of him, stopped coming to satsang. He began to half believe the rumors which were spreading and became fearful of the violent threats which were being made against any who dared to speak up for Baba. Soon, he also joined the AntiO Mandalay committee, and its members, realizing the coup they had achieved, made him as its president. Only a few days before, Baba had seen the Mukhi and given him a gramophone record as a present. The record contained a beautiful song, one verse of which went like this: "O God, take me away from this world of sin to some far, far, far off place where there is peace. I cannot live in this vicious world for even a moment more. Take me away from these cunning, lustful, selfish, worldly people of deceptive speech and hateful vision. Take me to where the deities dance, the golden age." The record was meant to be an aid to the Mukhi for keeping the memory of Supreme God fresh in his mind. The song was rendered beautifully by the singer. But when people came to know about the record, they whispered maliciously to Mukhi, "There is black magic in this record. Never, never play it, or there will be a terrible effect on all of you. Do not touch it either. We will call a magician to examine it and find out what kind of magic is in it." Mukhi believed all this was true, so he said, "All right, call the magician." They got hold of one who had a reputation for knowing the method of getting rid of ghosts by the hand of the one possessed and many other secret arts. He came and performed an exhaustive examination. Finally, he gave his diagnosis. "Oh yes, there is much effort of black magic in this record. You're all fortunate that nobody has touched it yet. Otherwise, there is no telling what could have happened to you." Upon their hearing this, people began throwing stones and bricks at the record so that the magic inside would be destroyed. They get torn until the disc was smashed into 1,000 pieces. And the magician told them that the evil had fled. Such was the deteriorated mental condition of the people of India, subject to the worst and stupidest of superstitions. Truly, their intellects had turned to stone, and yet they were, at the same time, others whose minds were being filled with God's direct teachings, absolute truth, and whose behavior was becoming divine. This was the real magic, the transformation of character magically produced by Shiv Baba, who turned vultures into swans and hateful souls into loveful ones. So, the misguided people who attacked the record album were correct in thinking it contained magic, but it was the beautiful magic of knowledge. One of the observers of the demented assault on the record quailed. "Oh God, what an unfortunate land has India become. Not only has the ancient wisdom been forgotten, but even common sense is lost. A curtain of iron lay upon the intellect of man. Ignorance and blind faith in scriptures had led them astray, so that an institution as noble and pure as Mandalay could be mistaken for an evil force. But then, it is a fact of life that if an individual opens a shop to sell real diamonds, beside a shop which sells fake diamonds, people will believe his diamonds are also false. Even if he gives every assurance possible of the truth and value of his gems, people will have no confidence. It is a rare individual who will be able to depend on his own intellect and use impartial judgment, and thus to buy a diamond from this man. And so it happens, when the Supreme Father arrives to give away the diamonds of knowledge, how many can discern the one true merchant from the many false ones? The entire household of Mukhi was in uproar. The Mukhi himself was fear-stricken. He was Dada's brother-in-law. Yet, suddenly a barrier of prejudice fell between them. Dada's daughter, Nirmal Shanta, had fled her father-in-law's house several days earlier during a family quarrel. Now, she would not go back. When the news began to spread about the broken relations between these two personalities, others quickly took sides. Those who had long held secret grudges against Dada Lekraj now came out of the woodwork to join forces with Mukhi. One such person was a wealthy businessman who had once asked Baba's help in a personal matter and was refused. What had happened was this. His son had died, and afterwards there was a quarrel with his daughter-in-law as to the proper division of property. The daughter-in-law lived nearby, and she often came to Baba's satsang. The man thus asked Baba to put pressure on her to give up the fight for the property. Baba said no to such a request. First, because it was a personal matter with which he thought it improper to interfere, and second, because the woman had a legal right to the property and she ought to get it. But the businessman, who had been an old friend of Dada's, had not dreamed that his request would be refused. His anger over this had never diminished. Now, both of them, the Mukhi and this businessman, worked actively in AntiO Mandalay, pouring money into that group's coffees in order to achieve a single objective: bring Mandalay to its knees. This strategy was to frighten the families of those who attended the satsang, to spread false rumors about Baba's teachings, and secretly to pressure the government into prohibiting Mandalay from operating. The strategy worked well, and soon many households were keeping their daughters under lock and key. The more superstitious ones and the more worried husbands put 5 and 7 locks on the door and kept the women under strict surveillance. Often they even deprived them of food. And there were cases of women being chained physically to their beds and beaten day after day until they would agree to give up this desire to attend Baba's satsang. Despite the merciless torture, the women did not submit. Om Shanti. To be continued in the next episode.